So here the kernel, just to recap where we are. So, so this is the host code. VR.cpp has the host code. And yeah, so if we go here on line number 199, this is the place where we are transferring data from the host memory to the device global memory. So FPGA has a global memory, and we are transferring data from the host memory to the device global memory on line number 199. And we are launching the kernel on line number 204. And on line number 210, we are getting the results back from the FPGA back to the host memory. In this application, you will see the particular way in which this is set up. You don't get really much benefit because a lot of time is spent in data transfer, and very almost negligible amount of time is spent on the actual computation. And if you see the hardware, this summary, if you go down and if you see under we add V1 kernels simulation hardware, let's see this one. And if we can analyze what we have by looking at the these logs that are generated, right? So if you see some important things to note here, or the frequency at which the system is able, it says the system can synthesize this design at around 340 megahertz, which is quite a good frequency. And yeah, and then so from the kernel there is only one compute unit that got instantiated. We will revisit this idea of instantiating compute units from kernel a bit later. But in the particular design that we have, there is only one compute unit that got instantiated from the given kernel. And you can see that in the source code, there are a couple of loops that are present in the source code. So if you see the kernel add source code, let's go here. Yeah. So here you can see that there is a loop read1 on line number 64, which fetches the part of an array from the global memory and keeps it in the BRAM of the FPGA, on the BRAM, local BRAM of the FPGA. And then there is another loop on line number, which starts on line number 71, which is labeled VAdd_WRITEC. And this is where we are doing both the data transfer and computation. And you can see here that that the read1 loop, it takes 259 clock cycles to the latency to finish. And the subsequent loop, it requires 260 clock cycles. And this is this estimate is obtained through hardware emulation. And then also you can see below, so some information like the number of flip-flops used, LUTs used here on line number 42. you can see the number of flip-flops LUT is used by different sections of the code that we have in the kernel. Yeah, we will skip this. We'll revisit it later. And yeah. So again, so just the same, the latency associated with read one is 259. But if you see, there is something called as an iteration latency. There is an iteration latency. Iteration latency is 3 clock cycles for the first loop, and it is 4 clock cycles for the second loop. And the total loop latency, there is a loop latency, there is an iteration latency. So what happens is, if you see here, this is the code. So for read one, able to. So let me just type it in here because I have some problem in my thing. So on read one, if you see the each iteration of the loop, it takes 3 clock cycles. Each iteration, it takes 3 clock cycles. And if you see the array, the total array size is 4096 elements are present. And if you go up and see, the buffer size is 256. Buffer size is 256. So buffer size is equal to 256. And if you do this, and so the number of iterations it will be 4096 by 256. How much it is? 4096. 16. Huh? So loop is 4096 divided by the number of times we iterate, number of iterations, it is 16. Okay. So if you, and this is pipeline, and this iteration is, so this iteration is pipeline. And how many times we go through, no, this one we go through 16 times, right? Yeah, this is, this one, we are operating suboptimal. So the outer loop, no, it goes through 16 times. The outer loop at line 15, it goes through 15 times. And the chunk size here is, each iteration takes 3 clock cycles, and the chunk size is 256. Buffer size is 256, right? So we expect, like 256 times 3 clock cycles. But why is it the report is telling it only takes 256 clock cycles for the read, for this whole loop to finish?
Pipeline.
Yeah, so the loop is pipeline. Since the loop is pipeline, although each iteration takes 3 clock cycles, the latency of each iteration is 3 clock cycles. Since it is pipeline, it approximately takes 255 to 56 clock cycles. The throughput is 1 iteration per clock cycle, okay, due to pipeline. So similarly, same thing occurs here. So the loop 75 to 79, it is 4 iterations. The pipeline, it takes 4. If you go and look at the report, Whiteley's analyzer report, you will see the iteration latency is 4, But the loop itself takes only around 256. The total loop latency is 258 because the throughput that is achieved is one iteration per clock cycle because of the pipelining of the loop. Kalesha has a question, so you can unmute yourself, Kalesha.
Sir, here iteration latency is for just for the read one is for copying the data from the one vector to the other one. That is taking 3 clock cycles.
Yeah, that's true.
And via pipelining, we are reducing it to one through one means like the one read.
Effective throughput. The throughput becomes yeah.
Yeah.
So the throughput becomes one. What do I say? One iteration per clock cycle because of the overlapping of consecutive iterations.
So, so here 3 means like the clock cycles or the
3 is clock cycles. Yeah.
means I'm not getting like just to copy one thing, we are taking 3 clock cycles.
It's not. We will wait a. We will let's see why it takes 3 clock cycles. So,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Sir, this buffer size is only 256 because of the limitation in the VRAM memory.
Yeah, you cannot. There is a limitation. I'm not sure in this particular case if we can increase the buffer size from 256 to a bigger number, like 512. But usually there is a limitation on the VRAM size. So subject to that, no, you cannot have arbitrarily large local buffer size. Yeah.
Yes.
So this is about the hardware emulation. If you see, these are the things you will get some more information, and yeah, this is log. So let's go back and let's try to see the hardware. And then we build after we do the hardware emulation, we can look at. So there should be a timeline also. There is no timeline here. Yeah, let's see. So we go to hardware. So after we build the hardware, you can see. So in this particular example, in this particular design, all the 2 vectors that we want to add, they are present in DDR0 memory. Okay, in one, and the output also we are writing to the same memory bank. If you go look at the platform diagram, so in this particular system, there are 4 memory banks are there. And but in this design, we are using only 1 memory bank. Okay.
Sir, one doubt.
Yeah.
This DDR is global memory or local memory?
DDR is global memory.
Okay.
Global memory of FPGA.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this DDR is the global memory of FPGA. And then this is the device map. And maybe Padmini ma'am can explain a bit here. So apparently there are these super logic regions, SLR0, SLR1, and SLR2. The DDR controllers, in order to access the memory on the FPGA fabric, I think we have these memory controllers. So the memory controller for DDR1 bank is present in SLR2 region, and the memory controller for DDR0 and 2 is present in SLR1 region, super logic region, and the memory bank for DDR3 is present in SLR0 region. So what is super logic regions? I am not exactly sure. from what I read, no, there's a kind of, this is a separate region and this is a separate region. Padmini, do you have anything to add here on super logic regions? Okay, not sure if, okay. So I'll proceed and then the system estimate. So this is after hardware emulation will come later. System guidance, this is okay.
Suresh, I'm sorry, was there a question for me before the
Yeah. So we were
yeah.
looking at
the volume and all network was not great here, so I couldn't hear for a few minutes.
oh, sure, no problem. So
Yeah.
here we are looking at this device map, and we are checking, like from what I read, there are these super logic regions.
Yes.
And, so when we and different DDR memory controllers for different banks are present in different super logic regions, as it is given here. Just want to understand what this super logic region is and no, exactly and.
Okay. So if you remember in the first second lecture, we had talked about this SSIT technology, where you have multiple dies that are kind of connected together to form a bigger chip through these interposer layers, and through silicon via going through the interposer layer, right, to form routes. So those are referred to as super logic regions. So basically, these are actually three separate dies: SLR0, SLR1, and SLR2. They are three separate dies, and on the chip they are connected. So there is some routing between them, which goes through this interposer layer and through silicon via. So there is some limited amount of routing through them. And it typically goes through a primitive that we call a Laguna, which has the ability, it has some flops, so you can actually register the signal going through. So those are the three super logic regions.
So,
And,
okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't know, was there a question?
Yeah, I was thinking, so usually when we try to synthesize a design, we would like to see that it kind of gets confined to either one of the SLRs, ideally.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So here, so normally, right, if you actually had a design which was small enough that it fit into an SLR, you would not go for an SSIT device. You would actually go for a smaller device which has just one die. So typically the designs that would go on a chip of this size would be big enough to span multiple SLRs. Now for Vitis designs in particular, you see these DDRs, right? So that is related to the platform of the design. So if you recall, right, when we talked about host and this is, I hope the students remember in that lecture, we talked about host and kernel code, right? And how the accelerator card has to communicate with the host through PCIe, and it has to communicate with the memory which is on the card through a DDR controller, right? So all that is actually implemented on your chip through what we call a platform. Right? And so you have so DDR1 refers to a memory controller which is located on SLR1. DDR0 and DDR2 are located on, on SLR2. DDR0 and DDR2 are located on SLR1, and DDR3 is located on SLR0.
Yes. Okay.
So there are three memory controllers, and I believe it is configurable. So you could select a platform also where you don't need to use the fourth memory controller.
Okay.
So you can use only three.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that actually takes up some area on the chip.
Okay.
So depending on the platform that you use and the board that you use,
Mhm.
this may take up, some. So for example, fair amount of space on the mid SLR is taken up by the DDR controllers because it's helpful to have that logic in the middle of the chip if you think about it, right? Logic at both ends may want to communicate.
Mhm. Okay, I see.
And,
Okay, got it.
Ma'am, sir, so what is SLR means? What is it like the FPGA's thing or?
it's a die in itself. So it's an FPGA die, right? And it has a fabric on it. So
So
it has,
the reconfigurable logic is in the SLR.
yes. So it has reconfigurable logic. So think of these as 3 dies which are connected together by an interposer layer with through silicon vias and routing through them.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yes, I mean DDR is in the host or in the
No, the DDR controller is in the FPGA. So you need a controller to communicate with the memory. You need something to basically give it read-write requests, get the addressing, take care of any error control coding if need be. So typically in FPGAs, you use a soft memory controller. And what has been done in the Vitis platform to make it easy to use is the soft memory controllers are actually pre-implemented.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And if it's a HBM device, it will support HBM. So these they have to support, right, a specific DDR protocol also, based on what you have. So these are DDR4. Typically, it is DDR4, I think, in most of these platforms.
Okay, ma'am.
Makes sense.
Does that make sense? See,
Yeah.
if you go back and read about DDR protocols, it's actually quite interesting and fairly straightforward to understand. Even if you find a Wikipedia article, it's explanatory enough.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Okay.
So you'll see the difference between the 4 generations of DDR.
Okay, great. Yeah, nice. So just to emphasize to Kalishan, so there is an external DRAM that is present here. And so what you are seeing here, they are DDR controllers which sit on the FPGA chip. Okay.
And the DRAM is in the DRAM is the host, sir.
No, there are 2 things now, Kalisha. So there is a host has its own DDR memory and FPGA has its own DDR memory.
Oh, okay, sir. I got it.
You got it, na?
Yeah.
And then let's keep going. So yeah, this is timing. So whenever you do synthesis, you have to look at what is the LUT utilization, what is DRAM utilization, what is URAM utilization, what is DSP utilization. Like for example, in this particular case, if you see the DSP utilization is almost nothing. So on these Amazon F1 instances, the FPGA has close to 7,000 DSPs. But in this example, in this design, we are using only 3 DSPs. Okay, so one interesting problem you should try to do, or maybe we will give it in the homework, is instead of vector addition, if we give vector multiplication, rather if we think of the dot product operation, then so how when we use dot product, no, instead of additions, we are doing the multiplications and additions. So how in that case will we end up using DSPs or not is something worth looking at. So we need to, and also instead of right now we are using integer data points, even for vector addition, instead of using integers, if you use floating point, 32-bit floating point representation and perform the same design, then how the DSP utilization changes also we should see. So if you think about it, there is, we will later we will see, there is something called as a roofline analysis. Okay. So in roof, if you see these DSPs are, they can do this multiply and accumulate operations very fast. So if there are 7,000 DSPs and those 7,000 DSPs, they can do 7,000 multiplications per clock cycle. So in every clock cycle, you may want to, when you come up with a design for a system, you may want to come up with a design where you keep these DSPs busy all the time. So that they, at the end of the day, we want to do computations, right? And so those designs where we kind of hit the limit of the FPGA performance, they are great. So that's so. But on the contrary, if you have 7,000 DSPs, but you are using only 10% of the DSPs, then that means you are not using the full compute power which your FPGA is providing. In order to keep the DSPs busy, it's not easy because we should be able to pump in data at the rate at which the DSPs can do the computation. So in the vector addition example, if you see, we are doing 2 reads and 1 write, and we are doing only one addition operation. That is, if you look at the ratio of compute to memory, it is 1:3. So this is what is called as a memory bound application. That is, a lot of time we are doing data transfer and the compute is very less. So this is a very memory bound application, vector addition. So usually, those, so it is hard to, we need to put in a lot of effort to optimize our designs, which are for applications which are memory bound. Okay, keep that in mind. It's a very important thing that the compute intensity is 1:3, 1 compute for 3 memory operations. So it's a very memory bound application, vector addition. Yeah. Let's continue. And I would like to, let's go look at the HLS code. So this, I think Whiteys underneath, it uses Whiteys HLS tool for synthesizing the kernel. Let's see how this works. Okay. So this is the Whiteys HLS tool, and you can see the synthesis summary here. Okay, here this is the synthesis summary. Again, if you see this table, so you can see that the latency associated with this read one loop, it is around 256 cycles, and the latency associated with this write C, it is 258 cycles. And you can actually go look at the synthesis report also. Like synthesis, you can see how you can say go to source. Okay, so this says this particular thing that we are referring to in the source, it will just points us to that. If you go and do go to source. Similarly, here you can go and you can do go to source. Then then what we are looking at on this particular highlighted line, it corresponds to the loop from line 71 to line 75. All right. And so this is one report you should look at.
Sir, how did we open this white is HLS on which file did we open?
So you should go here, you in the HLS synthesis here. I just pressed this project it is
Okay.
highlighted. So okay,
Okay.
after project. So this is when you do the design, you should go through this very carefully. This what you have here. You'll get a lot of information, nice information here. So one thing which I'm not able to understand from this, I tried to understand, but I couldn't, but maybe some of you might be able to help me out. In the code that we have, the first loop latency is 250, is let's say 260 clock cycles latency. And the second loop's latency is also around 266 clock cycles. So roughly speaking, together, both these loops put together, their latency is 500 clock cycles approximately. And the outer loop on line number 57, it goes through 16 cycles we will go through. So 16 into 500 is something like 8,000 clock cycles. So the whole, the latency for this whole loop is around 8,000 clock cycles. But for some reason, this YTS underscore this one, it keeps saying, that it says that the latency goes till, this is an estimate, but I'm not sure, it says 11,000 or close to 12,000 clock cycles. So this I am not able to understand. So why, is there any something wrong in the estimation or what is happening? But otherwise, once you invoke this kernel, what happens is this kernel takes around 8,000 clock cycles to finish. And then again, you can initiate this, call this kernel again with a different set of input. Okay, are you with me here? So this whole kernel, so in my understanding, it should take around 8,000 clock cycles. And after 8,000 clock cycles, one cycle of computation is done. And then you can call this, launch this kernel again with a different set of input after doing the necessary data transfers to the FPGA global memory. And here you can see synthesis results for different modules. Like the kernel we add, it is taking three VRAM modules. It is taking 3 VRAM modules. And it's not using any DSPs, it is using flip-flops and LUTs. Okay, some number of flip-flops and LUTs. Okay, so here, just check that thing here. This is also interesting things to look at. And also this iteration latency for, if you go down, the iteration latency for this is given as 730 clock cycles. Again, I'm not sure why that 730 clock cycles, because as I see it, the iteration latency should be 500 clock cycles ballpark. So where is that 230 clock cycles coming from? It's not clear. So
I think I can check on some of this. There may be some overheads which are being modeled.
yeah,
I
so
will check on this and get that.
sure, Lala. I tried to look at the schedule viewer to see what is happening, but I didn't find anything. They couldn't make out anything from there. So yeah, maybe I thought something to set up with data transfer from DDR to VRAM. I'm not sure, but yeah, we can check later.
Sir, I think if you check line number 57, sorry, line number 62, the variable chunk size is getting updated. And the loop in 64 will be, it's supposed to run for chunk size number of times. So depending on the iteration, or if it goes into that condition, then the loop would run for fewer number of iterations as expected. Like the variable chunk size can change from buffer size to size minus 1, and size minus 1 is again an input to the kernel. So I think the 200 cycles account for the change in chunk size, which would in turn change the number of iterations for which the loop in line number 64 is.
But the actual computations on line number 61 and 62, it's just hardly takes couple of few clock cycles, 3-4 clock cycles. And that chunk size gets changed only in the last iteration, where if it's not a multiple of 256, buffer size is 256, right? So if you are working with, let's say, 5000 elements, then 4096 perfectly divides. So all the iterations will have chunk size 256, except the last iteration where the chunk size becomes equal to 4, because only 4 elements are left. So line number 61, 62, I'm not able to see. It's just 2-3 clock cycles max. There is one addition, there is one comparison, and that's it. No? So how can you account for that many clock cycles?
How many clock cycles are you expecting from line number 71 to 75?
256. Yeah, 256, 250 ballpark. The chunk size is 256. So
But it's first a read, then a write. So it will be counted twice, right?
which one?
Line number 74. It's a
Line-
read and a write.
Line number 61 or
74. 74.
74, it's a read and a write. So overall, that each iteration of the loop takes 4 clock cycles, but it gets overlapped. It gets pipeline. So effectively, every iteration takes only 1 clock cycle.
No, but you will be performing 2 operations there, right? You will first do a read, then a write. So it will be 2 clock cycles there, not 1.
Yeah, that's true. But overall, 4 clock cycles for sure. No? That's what it says. The synthesis report says it requires 4 clock cycles per iteration.
Okay.
So let's see the schedule viewer. So this is what we have. And in the schedule viewer,
Hello,
so
sir.
if you, yeah.
Sir, why this loop 57.1 is for which segment
This
of
is the outer loop. This is the outer loop which encapsulates the 2 loops.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you, yeah, so here, let's see. Like this. Yeah, so if you see this line, so this is the, so what is happening is in the outer loop, if you see, before this is the kernel read. There are 71 clock cycles are happening before this. What is happening here? Yeah, there is this empty read request. What I don't understand is there are 70 clock cycles. So this is the one, this is the read one loop. This is the first loop where we move data from the global memory to DDR RAM. So, so before that, something, there is this empty underscore 22 read request. I think this could be a transaction to set up the DDR memory read, or I don't know. For the time being, just leave it there. But in any case, the point I want to bring it to you is, it is possible for us to understand what is happening within how things are happening within a loop by looking at this schedule viewer. Like for example, in this case, it will be nice if we can have source or access also side. Yeah, great. So here, this whole thing, so initially J_2, we are reading no, this variable, we read the variable J, and then there is some casting happening that we will leave it there. And this is a comparison operation which checks whether J is less than chunk size or not. So when we have this on this, you can see that this operation is scheduled in cycle 0. This comparison operation reading from the variable J, with most probably it will be allocated a register, and checking whether it is less than chunk size. This is also happening in clock cycle 0. And then after that, we are incrementing the variable J. Okay, this is add operation. It is also scheduled in cycle 0, I guess. And then there is a branch operation which checks whether we should come out of the loop or not. Yeah, so this is a write to J. So these two operations you can see, there is gmem_address, which gets the address of the global this in1 I plus j, and then from there the data is read. Okay, and reading of data is happening in clock cycle 1. In clock cycle 1 we are reading the data, and then in clock cycle 2 we are actually doing the write operation. So in1 is read in clock cycle 1, and and it is rewritten to v1_buffer in clock cycle 2. So how this loop is split into different instructions, and how these different instructions are scheduled in different clock cycles, you can see by looking at the schedule UR. Okay. And what we do is, yeah, so now this is per iteration, but it is possible to overlap. This is what we studied in the last class, that how we can overlap computations. Like for example, when we are trying to do a write here, we can try to do the read of the subsequent element in the memory in parallel. Okay, so through pipelining, we overlap the operations and we get an effective throughput of 1. That is, every iteration takes only 1 clock cycle. Similarly, you can go to this vadd_write and see how this vadd_write, and so how different operations in this vadd_write are scheduled, and it requires 4 clock cycles here, and again this loop is also pipelined. And you can use this thing, so you can use the go to source. Like for example, here this one, when I click on this, the corresponding line on the source which corresponds to this instruction will be given. So you can see this global memory underscore ADDR, whatever this write operation, it is scheduled in clock cycle 3, and it corresponds to line number 74 in the source code. Okay. So when you are doing complex designs and when you want to optimize, you may have to dig into all these things to see what are the critical paths in your design and how you can eliminate or remove these critical paths. So great. So now one thing is in this design, we are reading 132 one element at a time from the global memory. So let's go back to our whiteys. So if you see here, the size of, so now we are reading 1 element at a time from the memory. What happened? Just 1 minute. Some problem. I'm sorry, today I'm in a pretty bad mess because at home my mouse stopped working and my pad stopped working. The click is not working. I don't know what is happening. My right click, my mouse button is not working. Not sure what to do. Just give me a minute, please. Okay, great. So yeah, so we are transferring 32 one element from the memory. But apparently, so if you look at this is the design. So the DDR width, that width of we can get 512 bits of data from the memory. So 512 bits means if you number of integers that we can bring is maybe 16 integers we can bring in a single shot from the memory. But right now we are only bringing only no 1 byte. We are using only 32 bits. So that means approximately we are using not even 32. How much bandwidth we are using? 512 by 32. If you see for yeah, some numbers. So we are not. Yes. So we are not using the full DDR bus width. So what we do here is in the second design in we are I don't know how many of you tried this out. So there is one more example. So where we would like to use the full width of the DDR RAM. So let's take a look at the code here. So this is the kernel code. So here in this particular design, so we use you see memory ports. Yeah, somewhere here we okay. So it is possible for us to configure so that we can read 512 bits or 16 data elements at a time from the DDR memory. So in this code, pay attention here on line number 54. So there is a new data type that we are seeing for in1 and in2. In1, in2 are the input vectors and out is the output vector. All right. And then this data type is defined on line number 42. So this is a C++ template, if I'm right. So this data width we are specifying that we want an integer of size unsigned integer of size 512 bits is what we were asking for. That is the data type that we are declaring on line number 42. So that means so we are working on, if the data width size is 512 bits, then that we are working on a vector of size 16 elements. The size of each element is 32 bits. So we are working on a vector of size 16 elements. So this is a very interesting thing that I would like you to keep in to make a note of, because On an FPGA now, you will see that we are designing a SIMD adder unit. If you take your any of the modern processors, Intel processors or AMD processors, they will have, along with your main processor core, they will have SIMD units. These are vector instruction units, using which you can add 4 elements at a time or multiply 4 elements at a time using vector instructions. So now what we are doing is we are constructing a custom SIMD unit on our FPGA. You will see a bunch of pragmas. We can try to understand them later. Let's try to get the big picture here. And then we are using line number 78 and 79. You can see we are using 2 local buffers. So they will be allocated memory on VRAM. And so on line number 100, you will see a loop. 101 to 106, you will see a loop. And in this loop, so you are essentially reading the data from the memory, from the FPGA global memory to the local memory. And we will be fetching data. So, it's if the chunk size is, 256 is the chunk size, right? So 256 is the chunk size, but in a single shot, we are able to read 16 elements from the global memory. Then the bandwidth, you save, the latencies will be extremely, you save a lot on the number of times you have to go to the DDR memory and initiate a data transfer operation. Okay. So as against the previous example where only one vector is present in the DDR, in the VRAM, right now what we are doing is both the vectors, we are fetching them from the, we are fetching them from the global memory and storing it in the local VRAM. And line number 110 to, this is the loop where we are doing the actual computation. This is again a very interesting loop. Because on line number 119, or rather line number 116, you see we are adding a sequence of, we have this data and we are adding, there's a 16 element vector. We are adding one element in the vector side by side. And line number 117 is very interesting because we are telling the compiler, that the YT's compiler or HSLS compiler, to completely unroll the loop. We are not telling completely unroll, we are just telling unroll, but I think the compiler will be able to figure out that it can completely unroll the loop and do all the 16 additions. There are 16 vector additions. It should generate 16 separate adder circuits, or it can, if it is using DSPs, it can map each of these additions that gets, when you unroll this loop, you get 16 additions, right? Or let's say when you are doing vector multiplication, you will get 16 multiplications. So there is a design option here. One option is the multi-cycle application where you use only one adder or one multiplier, depending upon whether we are doing addition or multiplication in this loop, and then keep iterating over it, in which case we will take multiple clock cycles. Or we can completely unroll the loop and then you can schedule all the, map all the arithmetic operations to different parts of the FPGA circuitry. Or it can do, instead of, it can decide, hey, I have, instead it can choose to unroll only this loop only by 4 times. In which case, what happens is the latency, we will have 4 multiplier units which you will reuse across 4 clock cycles. Okay, in which case the latency will be 4. In which case the latency will be 4. I hope you are able to get what I'm saying here, that there are 3 design options here. So one option is you completely unroll the loop and you map all the additions. Let's say for the time being, we just focus on additions, but all the additions are mapped to different hardware circuitry. That is one option. In which case you use lot of area but the latency of the whole loop, this whole loop latency, sorry. Okay, the whole loop latency will be only 1 clock cycle, or you can have a loop latency of 16, but you save on the hardware area. You use only limited hardware resources, or you choose a strategy in between. That is, you unroll the loop only 4 times. The loop unroll factor is 4. So you take 4 clock cycles, and the area is proportional to the number of adders that you have per iteration, that is 4 in this case. So these are the design possibilities. And when you have an application, so you need to, the compiler will be able to make some decisions for you, but you can tell the compiler also, you know what, I don't want either here in at the unroll, you can, along with unroll, you can also give the unroll factor and tell the compiler how it would, how it should generate the design for you. Okay. So nice. So now let's go look at the hardware analysis here. Yeah, so here one more idea before we go. That is, in this particular case, you know, all the input, the 2 input vectors and the output vector, they are present in the same DDR1 memory bank. That means, you know, maybe if you are reading, let's say 32, no, 16 elements of in1 and 16 elements of in2, you may have to use 2 memory transactions to do it sequentially, one after the another. And then you are also, when the write loop is, when the write module, when the write loop, it is trying to write to the output here, on line number 121. So what can happen is, if you look at the whole design, when you look at the whole design, the write here may overlap with the read, in case if you want to pipeline the whole operation, this whole no, loop, the outer loop, if you want to pipeline the whole outer loop, or you want to do some kind of data flow operation, which we will see later, the write operation here will compete with the read operations here. That is, you know, when you're studying computer organization, you understand, you know, there are what are called as structural hazards. So if there are multiple hardware units which are competing for the same shared resource, then we call it as a structural hazard. When you take the whole big outer loop and try to, you know, kind of completely parallelize it, then there can be a structural hazard, because no, the write is competing with the read operations here. Okay. Yeah, so keep this in mind. So due to that, you may lose out on some level of parallelism that you can achieve potentially. So instead, so in this particular design, so it is possible for us to say that in1 I will put it in DDR0, and in2 I will put it in DDR1, and out I will put it in no, some other DDR3. We can have something like that. Okay, so this is what we have here. Let's see. We'll So let's look at the platform diagram. System. Yeah, so in the system diagram, now you can see that in1 is coming from DDR0 and in2 is coming from DDR2, and no, out is going to DDR1. So by doing that, it is possible for us to effectively increase the memory, accessible memory bandwidth to 3 times 512 bits. No? And this turns out to be very, very critical, because in memory bound applications, the greater the speed at which you can move data from memory to the CPU, then it is easy for us to keep the DSPs busy. In many applications, the goal you can roughly keep your goal as how do you keep the DSPs busy all the time? Okay, like for example, if you take CPU, you will have raw compute power of a processor as something like 1 teraflop or some big number. But in order to translate that raw compute power into application performance gains, you need to work quite a bit by changing your algorithm, by using your cache as well, and lots of things you have to do. So that what happens is we kind of eliminate the bottlenecks that come along the way to reap that or to gain, to utilize that peak compute flops that are available for you. Similarly, in the case of FPGAs also, like we have 7,000 DSPs and there are other logic elements. If you want to use the full compute power that your FPGA provides you, we have to use many tips and tricks. So one thing is, like, for example, we have already seen we can use VRAM. The second thing is you can use multiple memory banks. And and then there are many other tricks you have to use where you have to change your application algorithm itself a bit so that you can better use the on-chip available FPGA resources. Okay, and let's see. So this is summary platform. Yeah, so this is the device map. Now you can see in the device map DDR1, DDR0, DDR2, all these three things are put to use. And you can see now that, maybe we will look at this in the HLS synthesis summary. So let's go back. Yeah, let's go to the HLS, associated HLS design. Okay, so now look at the report. This is what we have. And you can see the latency here is now the whole thing. It has now reduced it to 208 clock cycles. Earlier, the latency of the VAD module, it is around 11,000 modules, 11,000 clock cycles. And even if it is overestimating, even if it makes an accurate estimate, at least 8,000 clock cycles is the estimate. Now we have the latency of this loop given as 208 clock cycles. Okay, so this is very significant. This is very significant improvement from 11,000 or 8,000 down to 2,008. So this is something I would like you to keep in mind. This is such a simple example, and when you are working with more complex problems, you have to be more careful. Okay, so we have to look out for opportunities for optimization. And you can see now in the earlier in the first design, we are using only 3 BRAM units. Now we are using 120 BRAM units, BRAM blocks. And so the latency of the cycles associated with different parts in the system, you can see in this summary picture. But the DSP utilization, there is no DSP utilization at all. Maybe it's not necessary for this example. And so I would really like you to take the same example, convert it into a vector dot product operation, and see how these things work out. and especially check the DSP column to see how you are using the DSP column, how well schedule viewer. So we will look at the data flow thing in the next class. We'll just, again, we can just take a schedule viewer and then we can see how the code. So you can see, go to source, so this particular subtract operation, it got mapped to line number 84. So by looking at the schedule viewer, it is possible, as I say, how instructions, how your source code is mapped to multiple instructions. Remember, in the case of CPUs, your source code gets mapped to a sequence of assembly language instructions, and those assembly language instructions are fetched, decoded, and executed by the processor. But in the case of FPGAs, the instructions that you are seeing here, they get mapped to actual hardware. Okay, there is no fetch, there is no instruction fetch, there is no instruction decode, there is only signal propagation, okay, across different circuit elements. And that is where the biggest benefit that you get from FPGAs, that you don't, there is no instruction fetch, there is no instruction decode. It's only, they are mapped to hardware structures, and there is only signal propagation, and what you worry about is critical paths in this signal in your circuits. Okay, in fact, if you see the compilers that are used by Vitis, if I'm right, maybe they could be using LLVM or G++ or some compiler. After the intermediate representation gets generated, from the intermediate representation, instead of generating assembly language instructions from that program IR, instead they generate this data flow circuit for the program. So yeah, so let me conclude today's lecture with this. There is one important document, one summary I would like you to take a look at. Yeah. So you can see these best practices for acceleration with Vitis. So the first thing that you see is look to accelerate functions that have high ratio of compute to input and data volume. That is, if your application is compute bound, okay, then what happens is then we can, the effort that we have to put in to accelerate it will not be much. Okay, you will be able to get application performance gains easily if the application is compute bound rather than memory bound. If it is compute bound, then compute time to input and data volume ratio, it will be very high. In the case of vector add, it is 1:3. It is pretty bad. And I want you to check how it is like for the memory, for the matrix multiplication operation. Matrix to vector multiplication, matrix to matrix multiplication. What is the total amount of data? What is the total number of additions and multiplications? Whether matrix multiplication is a compute bound or a memory bound operation. So you should try to look at it. And so we will look at only parts of that. We will, the other thing that we try to look at is take advantage of, this is the second thing. So take advantage of multiple global memory resources to evenly distribute bandwidth across kernels. Okay. So we can try to, that's what we were trying to do. So there are multiple memory banks. We should try to use as much we have memory bandwidth that is available for us as possible. Maximize bandwidth usage between kernel and global memory by performing 512-bit wide bursts. Cache data in local memory within the kernels. accessing local memories is much faster than global memory. And this is extremely important. Okay, so this storing data in VRAM and trying to access it from within is much better. And one more important idea is this. In the FPGA, different kernels use different kernels to take advantage of task parallelism, and use multiple CUs, compute units, to take advantage of data level parallelism to execute multiple tasks in parallel and further increase performance. So right now you have only one kernel. It is possible for us to have multiple kernels, and you can launch all those kernels, and maybe data, the output from one kernel, you can stream it as to another kernel, or these two kernels can be completely independent tasks. So each kernel can run on its own. So by having multiple kernels, you get task level parallelism. So right now, if you see within a kernel, we try to use pipeline parallelism. We try to use data parallelism, but at a small level, at the instruction level data parallelism we use, but not but task level parallelism we can achieve by having multiple kernels. So like for example, if there is a big image processing pipeline, some of the tasks in the image processing pipeline they can possibly handle by one kernel, and some other tasks they can be handled by some other kernel, so on and so forth. Okay. The final idea of using this, there are multiple things, we will revisit them again later. Using multiple compute units. Right now, we instantiated only one compute unit for one kernel. So, but why can't we? Can we use multiple compute units? That is, from the same kernel, you instantiate multiple things. In fact, when you try to do that, it is something equivalent to what we do in GPUs. In GPUs, what happens is we have multiple streaming multiprocessors, and within a streaming multiprocessor, there are many hundreds of identical streaming cores. So if you think of a compute unit as a streaming core, and we can instantiate maybe 100 streaming cores, and so that will be pretty interesting actually. So, so that's like you are having a custom GPU on your FPGA. Okay. In fact, it is possible that in your application you have two different kernels, K1 and K2. For K1 you can have 100 compute units, and for K2 you can have 100 compute units, hypothetically speaking. And and then yeah, so this is like a very custom system, highly customized architecture for the particular application that you have in hand. Okay. So I think so these are the few ideas I would like to. We will revisit this page again and again. This is very important. Like again, some things like use software and hardware emulation to validate your code frequently to make sure it is functionally correct. When you're trying to optimize things, if you go in order to take it all the way to hardware, it takes time. So you should try to check if your code is functionally correct by running it in software and hardware emulation. And also you should learn to read the reports, the White's analyzer reports. You should learn to read what are the things that you should be focusing on. So it's those are the hints you should get and see how you can optimize your system. And other thing related to what we discussed today is so we should try to the kernel, let's say if it is mapped to SLR 0, super logic region 0, then we should try to use the memory controller, memory bank, which is associated with the SLR region. So this otherwise you may have to use a longer routing path to access the corresponding memory. But most probably these things could be automatically be taken care of, but keep this in mind, whether the kernel, the data that is being accessed by the kernel, whether it is in the same SLR region no, to the extent possible or not. Okay, so with this things, I would like to conclude today's lecture. And so most of, so we learn a lot through experience. So you're all listening to things. But definitely by, no, by Monday, Tuesday timeline, so some written homeworks, some no, programming problems will be given, and also the guidelines will for the project will also be released. So yeah, so let's hope that we'll have a productive time, no, good learning time for the rest of this month.